Ali, great to have you with us. First, has there been any reaction to this so far in Israel?
There hasn't been any reaction officially from Netanyahu's office. I have texted officials close to the Israeli Prime Minister, but there's been no reaction yet. But we know, or we can predict, how they will react, given that when the chief prosecutor for the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, who's a British lawyer, first sought these arrest warrants, it was met with a lot of anger and, frankly, disbelief by senior members of the Israeli government and a lot of people in Israel as well. They were disgusted at the idea that the ICC could be investigating Israeli leaders for war crimes when it was Hamas that carried out the October the 7th attacks. But the initial request by the chief prosecutor of the ICC included, as well as Netanyahu and the former now defense minister Yoav Gallant, it included the two Hamas leaders, Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniyeh. Well, they're now both dead, killed by Israel, so they're no longer on the charge sheet, as it were. And Mohammed, another senior member, commander of Hamas, an arrest warrant has been issued for him as well. Israel says that they had killed him, but Hamas have not confirmed it officially. So, effectively, 3 arrest warrants have been issued by the International Criminal Court, but the 2 most significant, for obvious reasons, are those against Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. The court, in their statement they released, said that they have reasonable grounds to believe that those 2 men have been carrying out the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution and other inhumane acts. Now, it's been quite a lengthy process to get to this point ever since the arrest warrants were first sought about 6 or 7 months ago. There have been a lot of legal challenges, in particular by the Israelis, against firstly the authority of the court to do this. The Israelis argue that the court doesn't have an authority to pursue claims related to Israel because they're not a signatory, or the Palestinian. But the court rejected that and said they do have jurisdiction over Palestinian territory. There's also been question marks over one of the judges on the panel and their suitability to take one of these decisions and whether or not they were suitably independent. But the court has rejected all that and has now issued these arrest warrants. So what does it mean? Well, practically, it would mean that Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant couldn't travel to any state that is a signatory of the International Criminal Court. There's around 120 countries around the world, including many European countries, including the United Kingdom. And by rights, at least according to what those countries have signed up to, were Netanyahu to travel to any of those countries, he should be arrested by the police forces of those countries. And it'll be very interesting to see actually whether or what Keir Starmer and the Labour Party government's reaction is to this. Starmer, human rights lawyer by trade, shortly after Labour came to power, they actually removed an objection or a question mark that the previous British government had submitted to the International Criminal Court. But the United States, obviously Israel's closest ally, they are not a signatory of the ICC. So in theory, Netanyahu would still be able to travel to the United States, a country that he has such a long affiliation with, a country where he grew up in, went to school in his early years. And we've already seen from the incoming Republican administration in the United States threats to sanction the ICC were they to proceed with this. So I think Netanyahu will have support on the other side of the Atlantic. Also, these ICC arrest warrants don't always get carried out. We saw President Putin, who had an arrest warrant issued for him after the invasion of Ukraine, traveled to Mongolia a couple of months ago, and nothing was done about that. He wasn't arrested when he landed in Mongolia. But in terms of the reputation of Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, in terms of their legacy, they are now wanted suspects, wanted to be put on trial for war crimes. And it is a label that will never leave them. And object to it as strongly as no doubt they will do, nonetheless, a body of such, the International Criminal Court, has decided, after many months of weighing up the evidence, that there is sufficient evidence to request arrest warrants against Israel's Prime Minister and former Defence Minister.
And Ali, you say there's been no official reaction to it yet, but as you point out, when the arrest warrants were requested by Karim Khan back in May, there was a lot of pushback from the Israelis because, as we've seen, there were those 2 appeals that were put in place that the ICC rejected to date. Now, it's a de facto travel ban for those countries that are part of the Rome Statute, part of the ICC. But I think the first requirement is on national courts to bring in that arrest warrant as well. And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu has his issues with the Israeli courts at the moment. There are still those outstanding cases against him. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that an Israeli court would try and follow through on this arrest warrant from the ICC. But does this in any way build on some of the domestic pressure that Benjamin Netanyahu may be facing in that regard?
You're right. I don't see a situation where the Israeli High Court, for example, will demand the arrest domestically of either Netanyahu or Gallant. But you never know what might happen in the future. And that will always play on Netanyahu. You never know what a court might do in 5 years hence, 10 years hence, for example. I think there are cases, I think there is precedent for courts in countries to arrest their own citizens, their own past leaders, and deport them to The Hague. But it's not something I can see happening in the current state in Israel. I think this will make negotiations to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza potentially harder. I mean, they're difficult enough as it is at the moment. In terms of the timing of this, I think there probably are 2 factors. One is what is going on in northern Gaza at the moment, because Israel is being accused of carrying out anything between ethnic cleansing and genocide. I should point out the accusation of genocide is an accusation. It is not been formally labelled as such. That is a matter for another court, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. But those are the accusations that are being labelled at the Israeli government and the Israeli military for their actions in northern Gaza right now. And secondly, I do think that that incoming Trump administration might have played a factor into the timing for the release of this announcement as well. So it will probably complicate matters when it comes to trying to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. We will have to see how Benjamin Netanyahu reacts. I can't think that he will leave it long before releasing some form of statement, or something will come out from the Prime Minister's office. But in the past, he has been very defiant about his own actions, and a lot of Israelis, I would say, were appalled at the idea, even if they don't like or support Benjamin Netanyahu, they were appalled at the idea that Israel's leaders could be on the same charge sheet as Hamas's leaders.
Okay, Ali, for now, in Israel, thank you very much for that update.